An uncharted ocean. A dark forest on the outskirts of town. A chasm so cavernous that sunlight fails to reach its deepest chamber. Throughout human history and across cultures, these places have elicited a deep emotional reaction in us. We may feel both drawn to but unwelcome there. Perhaps we see ourselves as interlopers or uninvited guests in these spaces where man's power dwindles and nature's grows. We are allowed to visit, but this is not our home, and folklore tells us how great a sin it is to get too cozy in someone else's bed. Just ask Goldilocks. Goldilocks and the Three Bears is an old English fairy tale that you've no doubt heard before. It tells the tale of a young girl breaking into the forest home of three bears. She messes up their stuff whilst they're away, and when they return home she jumps out of a window and gets away with her crimes. In its modern form, the moral is confusing, but in the earliest known recorded version of the story, her fate is not so cheery, and its message is clearer. To clarify, much like many modern fairy tales, Goldilocks' story can be traced back to a darker and altogether more fun original story. Before she was a gold-haired young girl, she was a silver-haired old woman. And before she was a silver-haired old woman, she was perhaps a fox. People have connected the story of the three bears to an older English fairy tale called Scrapefoot. In the story of Scrapefoot, a wily fox breaks into the castle home of three bears and causes chaos in a manner very similar to how Goldilocks does in modern tellings. We have a recorded version of Scrapefoot's story in Joseph Jacobs' 1894 book, More English Fairy Tales, though as Jacob alludes to in the notes for his book, it would have been passed down orally for a long time before that. Either way, the oldest recorded version of the Three Bears story we have was written and illustrated in 1831 by Eleanor Muir for her young nephew Horace Brooke, or Hawbook as she called him. In Eleanor's telling, Scrapefoot the vixen is recast as a silver-haired old lady. The word vixen used to mean a woman regarded as quarrelsome or ill-tempered, so perhaps that's how the transformation occurred. Muir also chose to move the setting of the story from the wilderness into her own stately home of Cecil Lodge, a lovely old manor house which no longer stands. Muir's story starts by telling us that in times forgotten, it was normal for animals to talk and have houses, if they so chose. And so three bears decided to live in a house just like humans do. Their neighbour, an old woman, gets offended by the bears, and when they leave their home, she breaks into it to explore. From there, the story continues similarly to how you know it, except with an old woman playing protagonist instead of a little blonde girl. She tries their food, of which there are three varieties, then their seats, and then lastly their beds. However, when the bears return home, it is at this point the story deviates from what you probably know. Allow me to read you the end of the book. On the fire they throw her, but burn her they couldn't. In the water they put her, but drown there she wouldn't. They seize her before the wandering people, and chuck her aloft on St. Paul's churchyard steeple. And if she's still there when you earnestly look, you will see her quite plainly, my dear little Hawbook. When Robert Southey retold the story in 1837, the House of the Bears was no longer in the world of man, but returned to deep in the woods. And though the old lady was not as elaborately punished, the story does still end with her waking, jumping out of a window, and falling to her death. 12 years later, author Joseph Kundal wrote a version where the main character is a little girl. He apparently did this as he felt there were already enough fairy tales about old ladies. The little girl jumps out of the window and simply runs away at the end of Kundal's story. I wonder if this is because he didn't want to give a little girl as dark an end as the old lady, but that's just my guess. Either way, this version stuck, and it's at this point the moral becomes muddled up. But I think it's quite clear to see what the original moral of the story was supposed to be. That is, if you walk into a wild place and take what isn't yours, you will be punished for it. I'd like you to imagine yourself standing in a forest at night. You are alone, with no light source. You're waiting for your eyes to adjust to the darkness, but the details remain fuzzy and vague. You realise you're not entirely sure how to get out of here, and when you try, you seem to find yourself getting deeper into the thicket and further disorientated. You feel your heart thump a little faster in your chest. You start noticing the smallest of sounds, like a single branch breaking in the far distance. You don't know why, but you start to become convinced that you are not alone. You start to feel a sense of wariness, of dread, of panic. The word panic comes from the name of the Greek god Pan. In ancient Greek mythology, Pan was the god of, amongst other things, the wild. You'd find him in forests, mountains, and other secluded natural places, often up to no good, as per usual for many of the Greek pantheon. But just because of his wry smile and impish appearance, do not take him lightly. You should be wary of Pan. He is not to be trifled with. When mortals wandered into his domain, especially alone, Pan was said to sometimes instill an overwhelming sense of terror in them, a sense of panic. This fear was described as sudden, inexplicable, and often paralyzing. But here's an interesting thing. By no means was it only the ancient Greeks who told such stories. Want to hear another? A long time ago, in the land of the rising sun, a woman was walking alone on a snow-covered mountain. Imagine this woman as you. Freezing wind whips past your ears, muffling the sound of your feet, crunching and compressing the ground underneath you. You pull your hood tighter to your head, but even then, little snowflakes fly into your eyes. Town is far behind you. Perhaps they were right. Maybe you shouldn't have walked out here alone. You should have waited until morning. Panic is building in your chest. Moisture begins seeping through your shoes and into your toes. The cold travels upwards to meet the fear in your belly. You're breathing harder now. The cloth covering your mouth becomes damp as you pant into it. You are lost. You stop in place and survey all directions, but all you see is white. The terrain is pure, swollen and featureless, like a poorly made death mask. You try to keep moving, but the cold shackles your feet to the floor. It promises to extinguish your inner flame. Then, you see her. Ancient Japanese stories tell of Yuki-Onna, the snow woman. You may see her floating above the powder, leaving no footprints as she travels. She is tall, with long black hair, skin like iced over porcelain, lips blue and lifeless, just like yours will be shortly. Her cold eyes are said to be terrifying. Travellers are warned not to wander unprepared into her frozen domain, if you do not wish to feel her frosty bite. In Old Norse texts, we read of Landvættir, or land spirits, who guarded the well-being of the land and fiercely protect their home from those who may intrude upon it. In Scandinavian folktales, there are similar stories set deep within the forests. Trolls, Nissa, and other dangerous creatures were said to inhabit these dense woodlands. They punish you if you do not take the threat of them seriously. They are often painted in stories as protectors of nature from human greed. In one tale, the boy who had an eating match, a young lad sets off into the forest to cut firewood. But just as he is about to swing his axe at a fir, a great sturdy troll, covered in moss and stinking of manure, lumbers out from the dense forestry. "If you hew this wood of mine," said the troll, "I will kill you." Fair enough, right? You wouldn't like someone just wandering into your home and swiping your things, would you? We find in these stories, over and over again, a particular moral. That is, mortals should respect the wilderness, and if you don't, nature will manifest itself into a creature, a spirit, a god, or something similar, and punish us for misuse of their property, for not wiping our feet properly before stepping through their front door. And now that you've been told this, that answers the question of why you feel scared when you go somewhere wild, right? You're scared because you're waiting for a god to come and eat your soul. Well, no, probably not. When you think about it, it's pretty obvious why these places scare you, rationally speaking. Removing yourself from the tribe and wandering into the hunting ground of an apex predator where you do not know the lay of the land really should make you scared. That's our survival instinct. there's no mystery there. But the thing that really intrigues me is an additional element to a lot of these stories, which perhaps doesn't feel like such a rational response. It's the idea that we can be okay in these places, so long as we make a deal with nature. And that deal is promising not to take too much. You're allowed to be here, say the land spirits. Just don't be a dick. Let's hear another story. Once upon a time, deep in the frosty forests of Siberia, there lived a hunter. One day, whilst walking in the snow, the hunter heard something which terrifies all men of the wilderness. Silence. The hunter's mind began to race with fear, for he knew there was only one animal that could hush the forest in fear or in reverence. That animal was the tiger. The hunter quieted his dogs as he walked slowly onwards, deeper into the thicket. Eventually, he began to hear the fleshy sounds of feasting. His heart beat fast with panic, but foolishly, he walked on. He pulled a branch downwards and suddenly saw a flash of orange against the white. The mighty tiger turned slowly to face the hunter. Blood was smeared across its chops, and a half-eaten wild boar carcass lay at its paws. The tiger flashed its amber eyes at the hunter. Whether it was greed or fear that moved him, it's unclear, but the hunter raised his rifle and fired, wounding the great beast. The tiger retreated into the shadows, leaving the boar behind. The hunter seized the boar and dragged it away. He knew it was wrong. No better than grabbing another man's bread whilst his back is turned. But the hunter muttered to himself some form of finders keepers and headed back to his cabin, dragging a red line in the snow behind him. But the tiger did not let the story end there. He followed the trail of the hunter's scent through the snow for nearly 7 miles. When he reached the hunter's lodge, he did not find his prey. So the tiger tore through everything that carried the hunter's scent, ripping clothes, smashing furniture, and scattering the stolen boar meat. The tiger was not satisfied. So the great beast waited. For 2 long days he lay in the shadows, his golden eyes fixed on the lodge. When the hunter finally returned, the tiger took his revenge. Teeth flashed, claws flurried. The hunter screamed, and the snow turned red. Only a few parts of the hunter were ever found. Now, this story, though I've taken some artistic liberties in its telling, is not allegory. The story really happened to Vladimir Markov in 1997. But don't you think it's interesting how easily it fits the framework of some of the folk stories we've heard today? A man walks into the wild and takes more than nature thinks is fair, and nature punishes him for it. I read a really interesting New Yorker article where journalist Ian Crouch interviewed John Vaillant. John is the author of The Tiger, a book about the Markov story you just heard. It's well worth a read, and I'll link to it in the description of this video. But I'd like to read you a couple of questions and answers from it. Question. You write a lot about man's place in the hunter-prey dynamic. In the modern developed world, what have we forgotten about this long-standing connection? Answer. What we've forgotten is the notion of enlightened coexistence. Prior to the advent of agriculture and the settlement that goes with it, humans, of necessity, maintained a much more considered and considerate attitude towards animals and their environment. For many human inhabitants of Russian-speaking River Valley, the tiger is still seen as a fellow hunter, a colleague of sorts, whom one may encounter at any time, and whom one must respect accordingly. Question. You balance the need for conservation and protection of the tiger with the natural fear and distrust that the human population has about these creatures. Is it likely that people can be made to see the tiger as something to be respected, or even to be grateful about? Answer. It is absolutely within the realm of possibility, in part because there is an established precedent. Among the native population of Primori, tiger attacks, recorded or mythic, are exceptionally rare, despite the fact that these people have always shared space and game with tigers. The chief causes of the current breakdown in this historical detente are the radical depletion of the prey base due to poaching, which leads to increased competition for game, the loss of habitat due to logging, which leads to more chance encounters between poachers and tigers, and, above all, the commodification of tigers for the illegal wildlife trade, which leads to extinction. To me, the story draws parallels with tales told about the Sundarban tiger. The Sundarbans is the largest mangrove forest in the world, spread across parts of India and Bangladesh. The Sundarbans are home to about 180 tigers, but even though it's dangerous to enter, locals rely on the resources the forest produces to survive. So local fishermen will say prayers and perform rituals to the forest goddess Bonabibi before setting off on expeditions. Invocations to the tiger god Dukin-Rai are also considered a necessity by the local populace for safe passage throughout the Sundarbans area. In a fantastic short animated film produced by Wildlife Trust of India, which I've linked to in the description of this video, modern audiences are reminded to be respectful when entering the Sundarbans, told to stick to the age-old deal that says you can take a little from the forest, but not more than your fair share. And if you break this ancient pact, the tiger god Dukin-Rai will come and get you. I read a really interesting article about the Sundarban tiger on the website Niche Networking Canadian History and Environment, which is linked to in the video description. In it, the author, Surasil Hulda, makes a great point. They write, "The legend of Bonabibi is a wonder of hybridity, combining Islamic, Hindu and folk elements with such fluency that it is impossible to place the story squarely in a single faith tradition, nor is it necessary to do so. For the central tenets of the narrative, ideas of limiting greed and preserving a balance between the needs of humans and those of others, do not belong to any one tradition. They occur frequently in the folk stories of forest peoples around the world. For the islanders, the legend of Bonabibi goes beyond prejudices of caste, class and religion. They are essential values for this era of planetary crisis, and it is on them that the future rests. Indeed, especially now, Bonabibi offers a reminder. The forest is at its healthiest, and perhaps its safest, when human communities have no intention of taking more than what they need to survive." Do you remember Pan, who we spoke about at the beginning of this video? Well, here's an interesting thing about him. In some stories, he did something that you don't hear of many gods doing. He died. Plutarch tells us this story in his work, The Obsolescence of Oracles. He writes, "As for death among such beings, I've heard the words of a man who is not a fool, nor an impostor, the father of Aemilianus, the orator, to whom some of you have listened, was Epithersis, who lived in our town and was my teacher in grammar. He said that once upon a time, in making a voyage to Italy, he embarked on a ship carrying freight and many passengers. It was already evening near the Echinades Islands. The wind dropped and the ship drifted near Paxi. Almost everybody was awake and a good many had not finished their after-dinner wine. Suddenly, from the island of Paxi was heard a voice of someone loudly calling Thamus, so that we were all amazed. Thamus was an Egyptian pilot, not known by name even to many on board. Twice he was called and made no reply, but the third time he answered, and the caller, raising his voice, said, 'When you come opposite to Palodes, announce that great Pan is dead.' On hearing this, all, said Epithersis, were astounded, and reasoned among themselves whether it were better to carry out the order or to refuse to meddle and let the matter go. Under the circumstances, Thamus made up his mind that if there should be a breeze, he would sail past and keep quiet, but with no wind and a smooth sea about the place, he would announce what he had heard. So when he came opposite Palodes, and there was neither wind nor wave, Thamus, from the stern, looking toward the land, said the words as he had heard them, 'Great Pan is dead.' Even before he had finished, there was a great cry of lamentation, mingled with exclamations of amazement." Different people have taken the meaning of this story differently. Some people think the story is highlighting the death of the ancient pantheon as the world moved towards monotheism. Many scholars see this as a metaphor for the fading of the old pagan beliefs and the spread of Christianity, especially since Pan can be translated as all in Greek. Either way, Pan, god of the wild and nature, is apparently dead. But his image lives on in our modern imagination, of course. His horns and goat legs becoming associated with the biblical devil. Poor old Pan. Talk about being demonized. In 1894, Welsh author Arthur Machen published the novella The Great God Pan. The book is seen as a forefather to the modern horror genre, influencing writers such as Bram Stoker, H.P. Lovecraft, and Stephen King. I won't spoil the story for you, but needless to say, the invocation of Pan does not bring favourable outcomes for the characters in the book. Perhaps it is enough to tell you that when art critic Harry Quilter mentioned the novella during his article The Gospel of Intensity, published in the Contemporary Review in June 1895, he wrote of the story, "Why should he be allowed, for the sake of a few miserable pounds, to cast into our midst these monstrous creations of his diseased brain?" These are the places our modern imagination goes when we think of Pan, insatiable and unrestrained, a malevolent combination of man and beast, a horned figurehead for our untamed ancestry, the antithesis of what we deem civilized. For his part, Machen wasn't entirely happy with the tone his book struck. He said that in writing the novella, he tried to pass on the vague, indefinable sense of awe and mystery and terror that he had received while visiting the ruined temple of Nodens, god of the depths, in Caerwent, Wales, but felt that he had transliterated the feeling clumsily, elaborating, "I translated awe, at worst awfulness, into evil. One dreams in fire and works in clay." That last quote, where Machen spoke of awe and awfulness, brings up a fun etymological point. Have you perhaps thought it was strange that awful and awesome share the same prefix? Two words that seem like opposites. Well, it's because awe has lost some of its meaning to many modern ears. It's not just a sense of wonder, as many think of it now. It's a sense of reverential respect, mixed with fear. To get back to the original point of all this, the panic we feel as we come face to face with the untamed and the unknown, the vast darkness. In my opinion, it's good to feel fear in these places because fear is just one part of awe, and awe is one of the most amazing, important things to experience. For me at least, the times when I'm outside of a city and I stare up at a sky full of stars, it makes me feel small in a good way, realizing that the universe is the dark forest, and we on Earth are wandering through it, fills me with awe. But I don't often see a sky full of stars, and that's the case for a lot of us who live in major cities, which is really not a good thing. Research summarised by the University of Washington's Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences indicates that increased light pollution is associated with reduced feelings of wonder about the universe, meaning it seems that as we in our cities are seeing the stars less, we are losing some of the awe that looking up every night should give us. We're cutting off our ability to view space, separating ourselves from this wild place that Captain Kirk told us we boldly go. As we see it less, we dull our passion for it. And I wonder what happens when so many of us lose the drive to explore our final frontier. Here's my opinion. I think many of us are separating ourselves from nature too much. And as I stare at the Google Doc I'm writing these words on, I definitely include myself in that. I do not visit wild places enough. And it's probably because wild places are scary. They fill me with awe, and they may make me panic. Our houses are filled with the greatest creations of man, like lights, heating, and salt and vinegar crisps. But it just doesn't seem like a good thing to only ever indulge in the cozy and the comfortable, to define ourselves as separate from nature like that. After all, as easy as it is to forget, we are part of nature. To get back to that New Yorker article from earlier, John Valent makes a great point on this subject. He says, "Nowadays, nature is a place most of us visit, suppress, exploit, or avoid, rather than inhabit. This illusion of controlled remove encourages a lethal disconnect, to the point where it takes a major hurricane, oil spill, or tiger attack to remind us that we are actually connected, that everything is personal." This puts me in mind of something written by Seneca the Younger. The gods have not only given us the benefit of nature, but also display their power in the destruction of it. The floods, the storms, the earthquakes, and all the terrible aspects of nature are proofs of their power. The thing is, even if you don't believe in him, Pan, I think, is not dead. And in fact, Pan is angry. And the reason he is punishing us so severely at the moment, with devastating natural events all across the world, is that we forgot the very simple fact that humans all around the globe and across time have made with him and countless deities like him. That is, you can journey into his dimly lit realm. You can take a little of his stuff. Just don't be a dick about it. I'd like to end this video with a small section of the children's book The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, where Ratty and Mole, after a long night of searching for a baby otter, stumble across Pan himself.
"This is the place of my song dream. The place the music played to me,"
whispered the rat, as if in a trance.
"Here in this holy place, here if anywhere, surely we'll find him."
Then suddenly the mole felt a great awe fall upon him, an awe that turned his muscles to water, bowed his head and rooted his feet to the ground. It was no panic terror. Indeed, he felt wonderfully at peace and happy. But it was an awe that smote and held him, and without seeing, he knew it could only mean that some august presence was very, very near. With difficulty he turned to look for his friend, and saw him at his side, cowed, stricken, and trembling violently, and still there was utter silence in the populous bird-haunted branches around them. And still the light grew and grew. Perhaps he would never have dared raise his eyes, but that, though the piping was now hushed, the call and the summons seemed still dominant and imperious. He might not refuse with death himself, waiting to strike him instantly, once he looked with mortal eyes on things rightly kept hidden. Trembling, he obeyed, and raised his humble head, and then, in that utter clearness of the imminent dawn, while nature, flushed with fullness of incredible colour, seemed to hold her breath for the event, he looked in the very eyes of the friend and the helper, saw the backward sweep of the curved horns gleaming in the growing daylight, saw the stern hooked nose between the kindly eyes that were looking down on them humorously, while the bearded mouth broke into a half smile at the corners, saw the rippling muscles on the arm that lay across the broad chest, and the long supple hand still holding the panpipes only just fallen away from the parted lips, saw the splendid curves of the shaggy limbs disposed in majestic ease on the sward, saw last of all, nestling between his very hooves, sleeping soundly in entire peace and contentment, the little round podgy childish form of the baby otter. All this he saw for one moment, breathless and intense, vivid on the morning sky, and still as he looked he lived, and still as he lived he wondered.
"Rat,"
he found breath to whisper, shaking. "Are you afraid?"
"Afraid?"
murmured the rat, his eyes shining with unutterable love.
"Afraid of him? Oh, never, never. And yet, oh, Mole, I am afraid."
Then the two animals, crouching to the earth, bowed their heads and did worship. Sudden and magnificent, the sun's broad golden disk showed itself over the horizon, facing them, and the first rays shooting across the level water meadows took the animals full in the eyes and dazzled them. When they were able to look once more, the vision had vanished, and the air was full of the carol of the birds that hailed the dawn.